In the quiet moments of dawn, as the first rays of sunlight pierce through the darkness, there exists a sacred opportunity, a chance to connect with the divine before the world awakens. It is during these precious moments that Pope Francis revealed something extraordinary that has been changing lives across the globe. The Holy Father, known for his humility and profound spiritual wisdom, shared a simple yet powerful morning prayer that he believes can invite miracles into the lives of those who recite it with genuine faith and an open heart. This revelation came during a private audience at the Vatican when a young mother approached him, desperate and broken, seeking guidance after doctors had given her child a devastating diagnosis. The Pope took her hands in his, looked deeply into her tear-filled eyes, and shared what he called the gateway to divine intervention, a prayer that would later become known as the Miracle of Dawn. "My child," he said with tender compassion, "when you rise tomorrow, before your feet touch the ground, before the world demands your attention, whisper these words with complete surrender." The prayer he shared was not complicated or lengthy. It didn't require memorization of ancient texts or elaborate rituals. Instead, it was profoundly simple, yet touched the very essence of faith. Heavenly Father, as this new day begins, I place my life in your loving hands. Open my eyes to see your miracles, my heart to feel your presence, and my soul to receive your grace. I surrender my worries, my plans, and my desires to you, trusting that your divine will brings forth greater blessings than I could ever imagine. Guide each step I take today. Let your light shine through me and grant me the strength to be an instrument of your peace. I believe in your power to transform my circumstances, heal what is broken, and make possible what seems impossible. Thank you for the miracles that await me today. Amen. The mother, initially skeptical but desperate for hope, committed to saying this prayer every morning for 40 days. What happened next defied medical explanation and gave testimony to the power of faithful prayer. Her child, once given no hope of recovery, began showing remarkable improvement. Within weeks, the doctors were astounded by the inexplicable healing taking place. This was not an isolated incident. As word of Pope Francis's morning prayer spread, testimonies began pouring in from around the world, stories of reconciliation between estranged family members, unexpected financial provision when all seemed lost, healing of relationships thought irreparably broken, doors of opportunity opening when all had seemed closed, and yes, even physical healings that left medical professionals without explanation. The testimonies continued to mount as the prayer circulated from person to person, country to country, crossing boundaries of denomination and even reaching those who had previously considered themselves distant from faith. A businessman in Singapore, facing bankruptcy, whispered the prayer each morning for 2 weeks before receiving an unexpected call from a former colleague with a partnership offer that not only saved his company but expanded it beyond his wildest dreams. A teacher in Brazil, struggling with classroom discipline and considering abandoning her profession, began her mornings with this simple prayer, and within a month witnessed a remarkable transformation in her students' behavior and her own passion for teaching. An elderly man in Canada who had not spoken to his daughter in 12 years due to a bitter disagreement felt compelled after 3 weeks of morning prayer to reach out to her, leading to a reconciliation that healed not just their relationship, but brought peace to the entire extended family. Pope Francis is careful to explain that the power lies not in the words themselves, but in the heart that offers them. Prayer is not a magic formula, he often reminds the faithful, but a loving conversation with God who waits eagerly to hear from his children. The true miracle of this morning prayer is how it positions our hearts at the beginning of each day, open, receptive, and expectant. It creates a sacred space where divine intervention can flow unhindered by doubt, fear, or the constant noise of our busy lives. The Holy Father emphasizes that this prayer practice aligns with ancient wisdom found in Scripture and tradition. Throughout the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, morning is portrayed as a sacred time of divine encounter. King David wrote in Psalms about seeking God early in the morning. Jesus himself, despite his demanding ministry, would rise before dawn to pray in solitude. The desert fathers and mothers of early Christianity established the tradition of dawn, prayers that would later become the liturgy of the hours observed in monasteries worldwide. What Pope Francis has done is not create something new, but rather revive and simplify this ancient practice for our modern distracted age, offering it as a lifeline to those drowning in the chaos of contemporary existence. Sister Maria Consolata, a Carmelite nun who has been studying the spiritual impact of morning prayer for over 2 decades, explains, "When we begin our day in communion with God, we are essentially inviting Him to walk with us through every moment that follows. We are acknowledging that we are not alone in our struggles, our decisions, or our joys. This simple act of faith creates a ripple effect that transforms not just our day, but our entire perspective on life." She goes on to explain that morning. Prayer acts as a spiritual anchor, keeping us grounded when challenges arise. Those who pray at dawn, she observes, tend to maintain their peace even in life's storms. It's as if they've been inoculated against despair. The science of spirituality seems to support this wisdom. Researchers studying the effects of morning prayer have discovered fascinating changes in brain activity, stress hormone levels, and even immune system response among those who begin their day with spiritual connection. Dr. Jonathan Mercer, a neurologist who has dedicated his career to studying the intersection of faith and neuroscience, notes, "When individuals engage in prayer or meditation immediately upon waking, they are taking advantage of a unique state of consciousness, one where the analytical mind hasn't yet taken control. This allows for deeper spiritual receptivity and sets a neurological pattern that can influence thought processes throughout the entire day." His research team at Cambridge University conducted a 5-year study tracking participants who adopted a morning prayer practice. The findings were remarkable. 78% reported significant improvement in mental health symptoms, 65% showed measurable reduction in cortisol, the stress hormone levels, and 83% demonstrated enhanced resilience in facing life challenges. The brain appears to be particularly receptive to positive programming in those first waking moments, Dr. Mercer explains. By filling that time with prayer rather than worry or digital distraction, participants essentially rewired their neural pathways over time. Perhaps most remarkable about Pope Francis's morning prayer is its universal appeal. People from all walks of life, various denominations, and even those who previously identified as non-religious, have found transformation through this simple practice. Carlos Mendoza, a former skeptic from Mexico City, shares how the prayer changed his life. "I didn't believe in miracles. I thought those were stories for children or the desperate. But after losing my job and facing financial ruin, a friend convinced me to try this prayer each morning. I felt foolish at first, but I committed to 40 days, just as the Pope suggested. By day 12, I received a job offer that was better than the position I had lost. By day 27, a debt that had burdened my family for years was unexpectedly forgiven. I cannot explain these things except to say that something or someone was at work in my life." Carlos's story is just one among thousands that continue to emerge as this prayer practice spreads around the world. A young couple in Australia who had been told they could never conceive a child began praying together each morning. 6 months later, against all medical odds, they discovered they were expecting. A student in Kenya who couldn't afford university fees found an anonymous donor had paid his entire 4-year tuition after just 3 weeks of faithful morning prayer. An architect in Italy whose career had stalled for years suddenly received 3 major commission offers the same day, after a month of beginning each day with Pope Francis's prayer. These stories, while diverse in detail, share a common theme. What seemed impossible became possible when approached through the lens of faith and surrender. Pope Francis teaches that the prayer works in 3 dimensions simultaneously. First, it changes our perception, allowing us to recognize the small miracles that occur daily, but often go unnoticed. Second, it opens our hearts to receive guidance and inspiration we might otherwise miss in our hurried existence. Finally, it creates a spiritual conduit through which divine intervention can manifest in concrete ways. The greatest obstacle to miracles is not God's unwillingness to provide them, Pope Francis often says, but our unwillingness to recognize them when they appear. This is why the morning prayer includes the phrase, "Open my eyes to see your miracles," because sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come disguised as ordinary moments. The Pope recounts how he himself discovered this truth early in his priesthood. As a young Jesuit working in a poor neighborhood of Buenos Aires, he faced overwhelming challenges and limited resources. He began rising before dawn to pray, not asking for specific outcomes, but simply surrendering each day to divine guidance. What changed first was not my circumstances, he recalls, but my vision. I began to see opportunities where before I had seen only obstacles. I recognized divine assistance arriving in the most unexpected forms, a chance encounter with a benefactor, a volunteer with exactly the skills we needed, a donation appearing at precisely the right moment. These weren't coincidences, they were answers to that morning's surrender. Maria Gonzalez, a teacher from Spain, experienced this truth firsthand. After faithfully reciting the prayer each morning, she began noticing what she calls holy coincidences, encounters, conversations, and opportunities that seemed divinely orchestrated. It wasn't that these things weren't happening before, she explains, but that I was too preoccupied or distracted to notice them. The morning prayer centered me in gratitude and awareness, which allowed me to see God's hand moving in my everyday life. She recalls one particular morning when, after praying, she felt a strange urge to take a different route to school. This detour led to an encounter with a former student who was in crisis and contemplating self-harm. Had I not been in that place, at that exact moment, the outcome might have been tragic, Maria shares with tears in her eyes. Now I understand that divine guidance often comes as subtle promptings that we can either heed or ignore. The morning prayer makes me more attentive to these sacred nudges. One particularly moving testimony comes from Father Thomas Byrne, a parish priest in Dublin who had grown disillusioned after decades of ministry. I was going through the motions, he confesses, reciting prayers without feeling their meaning, counseling others while my own faith was growing cold. After hearing about Pope Francis's morning prayer revelation, Father Byrne decided to renew his own practice of dawn prayer. The first few days I felt nothing, but I persisted. By the second week, I began experiencing what I can only describe as a thawing, as if layers of frost around my heart were melting away. By the third week, I found myself weeping during the prayer, feeling God's presence in a way I hadn't since my ordination. The miracle for me wasn't a physical healing or material blessing. It was the restoration of my vocation, my purpose, my joy. Father Byrne's experience highlights an important aspect of this prayer practice. It doesn't always result in external, visible miracles, but often works its greatest transformations in our interior landscape. For him, the miracle was renewed passion for ministry, which in turn revitalized his entire parish community. The church was dying, he admits. Attendance had dwindled to a handful of elderly faithful. But as my own spirit came alive again, something began to shift. I preached with new conviction, I ministered with renewed compassion, and slowly people began returning. First a few, then dozens, now hundreds. The miracle wasn't just for me. It extended to an entire community of faith. Pope Francis emphasizes that the prayer must be said immediately upon waking, before the mind becomes cluttered with the day's concerns and before technology's intrusions can fracture our attention. In those first moments of consciousness, he explains, there exists a special kind of silence, a silence not yet broken by the world's demands. It is in this silence that God's voice can be heard most clearly. He encourages believers to resist the modern habit of immediately checking phones or turning on news programs upon waking. Give God the first fruits of your attention, he advises, and watch how that small sacrifice multiplies in blessing throughout your day. This counsel has proven particularly challenging, yet especially rewarding for those in high-pressure professions. James Wilson, a corporate executive in London, confesses that for years his first waking action was grabbing his phone to check emails and market updates. My day began with immediate stress, he recounts. My heart would be racing before I even got out of bed. After hearing about the Pope's prayer, James decided to place his phone in another room overnight and begin each day with prayer instead. The difference has been astonishing, he reports. My decisions are clearer, my leadership is more compassionate, my stress levels have plummeted, and remarkably, my productivity has actually increased despite spending less time working. It's as if those few minutes of morning prayer somehow multiply the effectiveness of all my other hours. For those who struggle with focus or consistency in their prayer life, Pope Francis offers gentle encouragement. Begin where you are, with what you have. If your mind wanders, simply bring it back. If you miss a day, begin again the next. God is not looking for perfection in your prayer, but for sincerity in your heart. This grace-filled approach has been particularly healing for those who have felt alienated from religious practice by perceived failures or inconsistencies. Rebecca Johnston had abandoned her childhood faith after years of feeling she could never measure up to religious expectations. I always felt like I was doing it wrong, she explains, like God was perpetually disappointed in me. When a co-worker shared Pope Francis's morning prayer with her, Rebecca was initially resistant, but eventually decided to try it, not out of religious obligation, but simple desperation as she faced a difficult divorce. What surprised me most, she shares, was the freedom I found in this practice. There was no right or wrong way to do it. Some mornings I would weep through the entire prayer. Other mornings my mind would wander, and I'd have to bring it back a dozen times. But gradually, I began to experience God not as a demanding taskmaster, but as a loving presence, patient with my inconsistencies, gentle with my brokenness, and always, always faithful, even when I wasn't. The testimony that perhaps best illustrates the power of this practice comes from Elena Vasquez, a young woman diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder that had left her virtually housebound. Each morning was torture, she recalls. I would wake up with my heart racing, already panicking about the day ahead. Medication helped somewhat, but I still lived in constant fear. Elena's grandmother shared Pope Francis's prayer with her, encouraging her to try it before even sitting up in bed. The first morning I tried it, I still had a panic attack an hour later, but something made me continue. By the end of the first week, I noticed I could make it through the prayer without my heart racing. By the end of the first month, I was having more good days than bad ones. After 3 months, my doctor was amazed at my progress. Eleanor's psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Lefkowitz, has since begun recommending the practice to other patients suffering from anxiety disorders. From a medical perspective, Dr. Lefkowitz explains, what we're seeing is a powerful example of how spiritual practices can affect physiological processes. The act of prayer triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest response, counteracting the fight-or-flight state that characterizes anxiety. When this becomes the first activity of the day, it essentially reprograms the nervous system's default setting. Elena continues, "The miracles came gradually for me. First being able to make it through the prayer without panic, then being able to go to the grocery store alone, then attending a friend's wedding, and eventually returning to work part-time. These might seem like small things to some, but for me, they were nothing short of miraculous. I've now been free from panic attacks for over a year, and while I still take medication, my dosage has been reduced by half. Most importantly, I no longer live in fear of fear itself. Each morning's prayer reminds me that I'm not alone in whatever the day might bring. What makes Pope Francis's revelation so powerful is not just the prayer itself, but the invitation it represents, an invitation to return to a practice as ancient as faith itself. Throughout history, spiritual leaders have recognized the transformative power of morning devotion. From the Psalms of David, which speak of seeking God early in the morning, to the desert fathers and mothers who rose before dawn to commune with the divine, this tradition has deep roots in spiritual wisdom. Yet, in our modern era of immediate, digital connection, where many reach for their phones before even fully awakening, this practice has been largely forgotten or pushed aside. The Holy Father's emphasis on this simple prayer serves as a gentle reminder of what we may have lost in our rush toward progress and productivity. The prayer itself contains elements found in many spiritual traditions: gratitude, surrender, trust, and invocation of divine guidance. What makes it unique is not its content, but its context, the emphasis on offering these words during those first precious moments of consciousness, before the world can insert its demands and anxieties. The dawn hours have always been considered sacred across different faiths, explains Dr. Elizabeth Chen, professor of comparative religion at Georgetown University. In Judaism, certain prayers are specifically designated for morning. In Islam, the first daily prayer, Fajr, occurs at dawn. Hindu tradition speaks of Brahma Muhurta, the Creator's hour just before sunrise, as the most auspicious time for spiritual practice. What Pope Francis has done is tap into this universal spiritual understanding and present it in accessible contemporary language. When asked why this particular prayer seems to invite such remarkable outcomes, Pope Francis smiles with the quiet wisdom that has endeared him to millions around the world. It is not the words that create the miracle, he explains, but the posture of the heart that speaks them. When we approach God as children, trusting, receptive, and full of wonder, we create space for divine love to manifest in ways beyond our understanding. He often uses the metaphor of a sail and the wind. We cannot control the wind, but we can adjust our sails to catch it. Morning prayer is how we position our sails at the beginning of each day, making ourselves ready to be moved by the Spirit that blows where it will. This childlike trust has proven transformative even for those facing life's most devastating challenges. Sophia Mbeki, a mother in South Africa, who lost her teenage son to violence, found her way back to life through the practice of morning prayer. After Thabo was killed, I couldn't see any reason to continue living, she confesses. Each night, I went to bed hoping not to wake up. A neighbor shared Pope Francis's prayer with her, but Sophia initially rejected it. How could I pray to a God who allowed my son to be taken, she questioned. Yet one morning, in the depths of despair, she found the prayer rising to her lips. I didn't even believe the words I was saying, she recalls. I was just going through the motions. But I kept doing it day after day, because what else did I have? Gradually, imperceptibly, something began to shift within her. The miracle wasn't that my grief disappeared. It will always be part of me. The miracle was that somehow, alongside that grief, I began to feel other things again, moments of peace, glimpses of beauty, even occasionally joy. The prayer became like a small crack in a dam, allowing life to slowly seep back into my parched spirit. Today, Sophia leads a support group for other mothers who have lost children to violence. I begin each meeting by teaching them this prayer, she explains. Not as a magic solution that will take away their pain, but as a lifeline to cling to when the waves of grief threaten to drown them. Many have found, as I did, that it creates space for healing to begin its slow, sacred work. Perhaps most touching are the stories of reconciliation that have emerged from this practice. Families torn apart by years of misunderstanding, couples on the brink of divorce, friendships shattered by betrayal, all finding healing through the ripple effects of one person's faithful morning prayer. Emmanuel Caruso, who had not spoken to his brother for 17 years, following a bitter business dispute, shares how the prayer transformed their relationship. I began praying for him each morning, not expecting anything to change. After a month, I felt a strange urge to reach out, just a simple text message. To my shock, he responded almost immediately. We met for coffee, both of us nervous and guarded. But somehow, the walls between us had already begun to crumble. Today, we speak weekly and have even gone into business together again. If anyone had told me this would happen, I would have said it was impossible. But here we are, living proof that miracles still happen. Relationship counselor Dr. Miriam Goldstein has witnessed similar reconciliations in her practice, and now often suggests the morning prayer to clients struggling with seemingly irreparable relationships. What I've observed, she explains, is that the prayer works in two directions simultaneously. It softens the heart of the one praying, making them more open to forgiveness and understanding. But there also seems to be something mysterious happening beyond psychological explanation. A shift in the spiritual atmosphere that somehow creates opportunity for healing, even in relationships that appeared permanently broken. Pope Francis emphasizes that the prayer is meant to be spoken aloud, even if whispered softly. There is power in giving voice to our faith, he teaches. When we speak words of trust and surrender, we are not just communicating with God, but also reminding ourselves of what we believe. The ears need to hear what the heart hopes for. This guidance has proven especially meaningful for those who find their faith wavering in difficult circumstances. Margaret Wilson, diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer at age 34, admits that some mornings she can barely whisper the words through her tears. There are days when I don't feel the faith behind the words, she acknowledges. Days when I'm angry at God, frightened of what lies ahead, overwhelmed by the treatments and their side effects. But I speak the prayer anyway, sometimes through gritted teeth. And what I've discovered is that even on the days when I don't feel faith, the act of speaking these words plants a seed of hope that often blooms later in the day. Perhaps when a friend calls unexpectedly, or when I witness a beautiful sunset, or when a scan shows the tumors shrinking against all odds. The practice has found particular resonance among those facing seemingly impossible situations: terminal illness, financial devastation, broken relationships, or the heavy weight of addiction. Laura Chen, whose teenage son had been battling substance abuse for years, began reciting the prayer each morning while visualizing her child free from the chains of addiction. 3 weeks later, Her son approached her voluntarily, asking for help finding treatment. After years of failed interventions and broken promises, Laura shares through tears, something finally broke through. He later told me he woke up that morning with an inexplicable desire to change, a desire so strong he couldn't ignore it. I believe with all my heart that my prayers reached heaven, and heaven reached my son. Her son, Michael, now 2 years sober and working as a peer counselor in a rehabilitation center, has his own perspective on what happened. I had no idea my mother was saying this prayer every morning, he explains. But looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when something shifted. It was like a fog lifting from my mind. I'd wanted to stop using for years, but couldn't find the strength. Then suddenly one morning, the desire for drugs was replaced by an even stronger desire for change. I can't explain it except to say it felt like being rescued by something greater than myself. Addiction specialists have taken note of such testimonies. Dr. Robert Jensen, director of a treatment center in Minnesota, has begun incorporating spiritual practices, including morning prayer, into his facility's protocol. We've always known that recovery has a spiritual component, he observes, which is why 12-step programs emphasize a higher power. What we're discovering is that specific practices like morning prayer seem to strengthen neural pathways associated with resilience and self-regulation. When combined with appropriate medical treatment and therapy, these practices significantly improve outcomes for many patients. Pope Francis is careful to note that miracles don't always come in the form we expect or within the time frame we desire. God's ways are not our ways, he reminds us, and his timing is perfect even when it doesn't align with our impatience. This wisdom has been a comfort to those still waiting for their breakthrough, a reminder that unanswered prayers are often not denied but delayed for reasons beyond our understanding. Rachel Goldman has been saying the morning prayer faithfully for over a year, while her husband battles a rare form of leukemia. Has he been cured? No. Has every day been filled with obvious miracles? No, she admits candidly. But have we experienced grace beyond explanation, strength beyond our own resources, peace that defies our circumstances? Absolutely. And some days, that sustaining grace is the greatest miracle of all. Rachel goes on to describe unexpected blessings that have emerged from their continuing trial, a deeper marriage, a more compassionate heart toward others' suffering, a community that has rallied around them in extraordinary ways, and most recently, acceptance into a promising clinical trial that wasn't available when their journey began. I've learned that miracles come in many forms, she reflects. Some are dramatic and immediate, others unfold slowly over time. The morning prayer hasn't changed our situation, but it has changed us, and that may be the most profound miracle of all. Obey. The invitation to begin each day with this simple prayer continues to spread around the world, crossing denominational lines and cultural boundaries. It has been translated into over 70 languages and shared in remote villages and bustling cities alike. What began as a private conversation between a pope and a desperate mother has grown into a global movement of renewed faith and expectant hope. Those who have experienced transformation through this practice often feel compelled to share it with others. It's like finding a wellspring in the desert, explains Father Dominic Leclerc. You cannot help but want others to drink from these waters. This natural sharing has led to informal prayer circles, online communities, and even small gatherings of neighbors meeting at dawn to recite the prayer together. In a rural village in the Philippines, a group of farmers gather each morning before sunrise, sitting in a circle under a large mango tree. Together they recite Pope Francis's prayer before beginning their day's labor. Since we started this practice, shares community elder Manuel Reyes, our harvests have been more abundant. But more importantly, our relationships have been healed. Old rivalries have dissolved. We work together now instead of competing. The transformation of our community has been the greatest miracle. Similar gatherings are occurring in corporate boardrooms in New York, hospital chapels in London, school classrooms in Kenya, prison yards in Brazil, and countless other settings around the globe. People from all walks of life, rich and poor, educated and illiterate, young and old, finding common ground in this simple practice of morning surrender. As testimonies continue to pour in, one thing becomes increasingly clear. There is something profoundly powerful about beginning each day in surrender and expectation. Those who have made this prayer a consistent practice report not only specific miracles, but also a general shift in their overall well-being, reduced anxiety, increased gratitude, greater resilience in the face of challenges, and a deeper sense of being loved and guided by something greater than themselves. Psychologist Dr. Jennifer Martinez has been tracking these effects in a longitudinal study involving over 500 participants from diverse backgrounds. The data is remarkable, she reports. After 6 months of consistent morning prayer and practice, participants showed significant improvement across multiple measures of psychological well-being. Perhaps most striking was the 74% reduction in symptoms of depression and anxiety, regardless of whether participants experienced what they would classify as a specific miracle in their circumstances. Oh, the real miracle, Pope Francis reflects, may not be what happens around us, but what happens within us when we place ourselves in God's hands each morning. This interior transformation ultimately radiates outward, affecting not just individual lives but entire communities. Businesses report improved workplace culture when leadership embraces the practice. Schools note decreased disciplinary problems and increased academic engagement. Hospitals observe accelerated healing and improved patient outcomes. It seems that the ripple effects of this simple morning devotion extend far beyond the individuals who practice it. Perhaps this is because, at its core, the prayer isn't just about receiving miracles, but becoming channels of divine love and grace in a world desperate for both. The final line of the prayer, "Thank you for the miracles that await me today," positions the prayer in a posture of gratitude and expectancy, looking for opportunities to receive and extend grace throughout the day. Anna Petrova, a hospice nurse in Moscow, shares how the morning prayer transformed not just her personal life, but her professional practice. "I began seeing each patient not as a medical case, but as a sacred encounter, an opportunity to be the hands and feet of divine love in someone's final journey. This shift in perspective brought a depth and meaning to my work that has sustained me through even the most challenging cases." Her colleagues noticed the change and asked what had happened. Now 15 nurses in her unit gather 10 minutes before each shift to recite the prayer together. "The atmosphere of our entire hospice has been transformed," Anna reports. Even patients and family members comment on the tangible sense of peace and compassion they feel here. That's the miracle, not that death has been eliminated, but that love has permeated even this most difficult passage of human experience. As the sun rises tomorrow, millions around the world will whisper these words of faith before their feet touch the floor, before the day makes its demands, before the world intrudes with its noise and distractions. And though their circumstances vary widely, from palatial homes to humble dwellings, from hospital beds to prison cells, from places of abundance to regions of desperate need, they share a common conviction that the God who created the dawn listens to their voices and responds with love. The invitation remains open to all who wish to experience this for themselves. The prayer is freely given, requiring nothing but a willing heart and the decision to begin each day in communion with the divine. For those seeking transformation, for those in need of a miracle, for those who have tried everything else and found no answer, Pope Francis's revelation offers a glimmer of holy possibility, a chance to discover what might happen when we truly surrender our days before they even begin. Pope Francis offers these final words of encouragement to those considering embarking on this journey of morning prayer. Do not be discouraged if you do not see immediate results. The seed planted in faith may take time to sprout, but it is growing beneath the surface in ways you cannot yet perceive. Trust the process. Trust the God to whom you pray. And know that no sincere prayer ever goes unanswered, though the answer may come in forms you did not expect or request. He suggests committing to the 40-day practice that has proven transformative for so many others. 40 days is a sacred time frame in our tradition, he explains. It represents a complete cycle of spiritual transformation, just as Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, just as Moses spent 40 days on the mountain, just as the rain fell for 40 days in Noah's time. There is something powerful about this commitment, this period of faithful persistence. Those who have completed the 40-day commitment often report that what began as a discipline has become a desire, something they now look forward to each morning rather than something they force themselves to do. It's like the difference between taking medicine and eating a delicious meal, describes Fatima Abadi, a mother of 4 in Jordan. At first, I said the prayer because I was desperate for help with my children, particularly my oldest son, who was falling into dangerous company. Now, more than a year later, I say it because I hunger for that moment of connection, that sacred space at the beginning of my day. Yes, my son's life has changed dramatically. He's back in school and thriving. But the greater miracle is that my own heart has been transformed. I've discovered a relationship with God that sustains me through all of life's challenges. Will you join the countless others who have found their lives transformed by this simple practice? Will you whisper these words tomorrow as the first light breaks across the horizon? In the words of so many whose lives have been forever changed, try it for 40 days. Watch with an open heart. Expect the unexpected. And at the end, many. Simply said amen. Share this prayer with someone you love, someone who might need a miracle today.